Hello, welcome to Found by Art Textiles Made in Britain. We're very pleased to be here at the Festival of Quilts 221, rescheduled from last year. The exhibition was devised 3 years ago, so at least a year before the current pandemic, but it seems very appropriate for this time. The artists within Found have all created work in response to the things that they find around them of importance to them, whether in the materials or what they find out about a sense of place or their history. What ties the materials together are the fact that everybody has used found materials within their work to a greater or lesser degree. We are absolutely thrilled to be back here in a space with people able to chat about our work and the work of the artists within the group. As part of Found, I had anticipated a very busy year in 2021, and with the permission of Art Textiles, we decided that I could show the pieces of work that I was commissioned to create for the Romany Cultural and Arts Company as part of a Gypsy Maker 4 project. And I wanted to identify with more information I found out about my own cultural history of Romany heritage. And that exhibition unfortunately wasn't able to travel, which is ironic given the nature of what it was telling the story of, travelling peoples. So during lockdown I found myself writing another book about embroidering the everyday, which has a close correlation with the ethics behind this exhibition about using what we find around us in the everyday things to create artwork of meaning. And this is using pani kekava, which means kettle, and the idea that through tea we come and tell our own stories. And with Art Textiles, our work is always about what we communicate, what stories do we tell and how do we tell it. I'm very privileged that Batsford sought to invest in this publication, and I'm very nervous about how well it may be received, because this is perhaps the one that's closest to my heart, and I think it comes at a very emotionally significant time.
So my name is Jessica Grady, and I'm actually the newest member of Art Textiles Made in Britain. My focus is very much recycled, so the found was a very natural thing for me to incorporate into it, because I'm a collector, so I'm always collecting bits and bobs, recycling, transforming things and making them into the embellishments. So this series was what I started first. So this one on the end was the first piece, and what I did is I made the sequins and embellishments, the sort of things like I've got washers from musical instruments in there, I've got some metal washers, I've got some little bits of sort of wooden circles, things that I've painted, and I've got some old shower mats, just loads of random bits. And then this piece, the threads off the back of the piece, so when I snipped the threads, then went into the next piece, which is this one, and I made sequins using recycled bubble wrap, but they trapped all the threads from the first piece, so it's that sort of continuation almost, and so they all interlink even though they're very different. And the sort of the three-dimensional pieces is very much something again that I'm into, doing the sort of sculptural textile pieces. And I think of it as sort of stitching vertically as opposed to stitching flat across the surface. And so they sort of tie in just in the techniques and the idea of things being encrusted and sort of growing across the surface.
This piece of work is by the artist Louise Baldwin. It's called Temporary Condition 1 to 22. Now I'm certain Louise wouldn't mind me saying that I always like to come to the work myself fresh. And what they tell me, or what I'm reading from them, is they're contained and squared in some, they're in frames. It's like you're trying to put things in boxes, and then the little pieces in between are breaking away. That's my choice of how to read them, that frustration of seeing these glimpses of, should that be there? Is that in the right place? Why have I got all this stuff around me? I nearly came out with the wrong words there, ladies. This was very precisely had to be placed up on the wall in a very orderly manner. So I always think it's like order over chaos. It's a stunning piece. I love the way she works with thread. and binds together meaning with her work, with what appear to be random things, but gives an order that is far from chaotic. This is the work of Edwina Mackinnon, one of our valuable local members as well. Valuable because she can bring things backwards and forwards for us. And these are containers of her memories, I like to think of them. What would you put inside? But also of some of her favourite techniques and materials that she's brought together. And it was fascinating to watch her hang them. She had this discussion about, she did try to think about doing them orderly, but when she pinned them to the wall, she felt that they needed to have this kind of order, so they moved across the space. And I like the way that, as a whole, when I'm stepping back from them, they look like butterflies pinned to a wall or trapped, but when you get close to them, you just want to delve inside and pull something out of the pockets. Edwina's craftsmanship in handling dye cloth and piecing together her materials is absolutely stunning. They really warrant us close inspection. You've got a whole vocabulary of stitch just in this posse of pockets. So behind me is the work of Rosie James, another Kent-based artist. And I was fascinated yesterday in these pieces, which are all named after the places you see here, Larkfield, Snodland, Aylesford and Strood, local to where I live and where Rosie lives. And part of that fascination is that people keep saying, is there really a place called Snodland? You know, it almost seems like it's a fascinating place. But if you look, she uses photographic references which are screen printed, which I would recognise. But her figures are kind of somehow connected and not connected. What could you do in Aylesford near a building site when you're stuck in a COVID lockdown but sunbathe in a chair? The everyday things, you find yourself doing things that you didn't normally expect to do when you're restricted. So, you know, you're doing shopping and what I find really interesting is the masks have gone from these portraits even during lockdown. And these are perhaps the badges of places you may not have been to visit because they're not so desirable, but nonetheless they have meaning to us, these small intimate places. And maybe more so in the last year and a half, we've rediscovered the unusual aspects or the characters of the places that are close to us. This is the work of Sandra Meech, our wonderful chairwoman, who's managed to keep us all together during this time and has been the doyen of making certain we have a Zoom meeting. I am completely surprised that when we found ourselves in this position, we still communicated, so we still had meeting via Zoom. But she's talking about something more important than anything here, and I think it goes beyond that our present crisis, and that's our future crisis, about the tundra and the polar melt. And these are digital images, she's graphics trained, of some of the flora and fauna of the landscape she's familiar with. She's a Canadian by birth. She's discussing quite poignantly in the plastics and the rubbish that we are contributing to in our planet, of how things are being disrupted and disturbed, and we're creating a chaos in our own future that we need to master. I'm very proud to be part of Art Textiles Made in Britain, and I think I'm going to hand over to two artists within the group to talk about their own work.
Hello, I'm Christine Restall, and these pieces are maybe not completely typical of my work. I usually collage pieces together. These are collage, but you can't see the stitching, and this was very important to me. These are from some denim shirts that I found in a drawer when I was clearing out our flat in London after my husband died 4 years ago. And I wanted to memorialize these shirts because they signified a great deal about the wearer and about the fabric and about where we had traveled. And it was very satisfying to tear them up, actually. And they should speak to you about the way that the fabrics work together, the way that the shirts would have been. I like to put them on some Japanese work fabric as a background, and the whole thing then becomes a statement about working, relics of working life, and relics perhaps of a life as well. Bethan Ash has used circles in a lot of her work over the years, and here she is again and what I think is an extremely original piece of work using circles from cans, but she has cut the circles out to be very precise, as you can see, with the brand names on them, and they are crocheted together. But what is really significant to me is the title that she's using for this work is Keeping the Homeless Warm, and she's making a real statement about the way some people's lives are. And to me, this is an extremely interesting and important piece of work by one of our best textile artists of this country.
My name is Sylvia Paul, and the idea originally was to make a piece about an attic and all the sorts of things that you would love to find in an attic, or things that you might not like to find. So some of them are perhaps things that might have some value, such as a famous painting, or something you might not like to find is perhaps a skeleton or some creepy crawlies like spiders. So I had fun making the quilt, which was made over a year all by hand, and tried to make little stories up in my head about all the objects that were going into the quilt, such as the Mona Lisa, what if you found it? And then there was an old newspaper with the story about how it was stolen. And then there's actually 3 Mona Lisas in the quilt, because if you look very closely you can find one in the doll's house hanging on the wall.
As part of Found, Art Textiles Made in Britain has produced a catalogue which is also going to be available online for those who are unable to attend with us at this restricted time. And if you look, that the front cover is in the shape of kimono, so it correlates with an exhibition, or last live exhibition in place in Japan in February 2020, shortly before the pandemic began, and it felt appropriate for us to honour that opportunity to be with people. And at that time we saw many of these being worn and had no idea what was coming. So these are some of the kimono pieces that were produced for Found, and they use remnants of kimono fabric which I collected from the exhibition at the Tokyo Dome. And I'm actually wearing a jacket that I've made from some of the kimono waste myself. And each artist was given a piece of kimono fabric and a piece of indigo Ayazome dyed fabric that was collected at the exhibition to turn into a short strip, which you can see behind us, and I'll talk about each of these briefly in turn, to create a symbolic piece representing that connection from Japan back here to Festival of Quilts. We thought it would be a really interesting connection to place and to talk about how continents are connected through stitch. So we begin with drain cover number 84. This is my piece. I was fascinated by the decorative drain covers I found in Japan underneath my feet, which are next to the Kanrokian Gardens, close to where the Tokyo Dome. And you see I've got these symbolic wristbands here, post-COVID wristbands having to be worn to say we're safe here. And this is my identity band to say that I was an exhibitor. I was A84, which I sneakily took away with me, and red is a symbolic colour of life in Japan. And I've tracked the idea of the path in the kimono here, which I think correlates really beautifully with Rosie James' pieces here called 9 People Walking. So you've got drain cover, me looking down at the floor, with her looking at people who are doing everything except looking at where they're going almost. They're looking at their phones, they're listening to their music, they're pulling their trolleys, but that's 9 people walking, which is almost like a Japanese poem, haiku. So it has that balance, but that same rhythm that's in the vintage cloth is here. Now somewhere in here and there, Louise Baldwin is moving house at the moment, so her pieces are almost hidden. I'm finding it hard to find them, but it has an echo for me of a torii or a gate or a fence piece. And again, that symbolic colour is coming through. So each person, I think what's fascinating about Art Textiles is interprets it differently. And somehow when we get here there is a kind of synergy and the work relates to each other. We have the freedom to express how we wish but bring the work together. So this is the work of Sandra Meech. She's our chairwoman, and it's geisha, so there's the same cloth, and she was fascinated by the same gardens and the beauty which you again often see echoed on the kimono itself. And her work, she's graphic trained, so her work often has a strong photographic and graphic element. And finally, coming to Edwina Mackinnon here, you can see the clear shape of the kimono echoed in this piece, and these are the width of the kimono cloth. So this is the width of the cloth that makes up the kimono, and it's quite evident that spiralling path. So these are 5 of 9 pieces represented in the exhibition. But I think what they do is demonstrate that given the same dimensions, the same width and length, that we can interpret things quite differently, so that in stitch there is freedom to express, particularly, I'm going to have to say this, particularly as we've spent 16 months following rules, the freedom that creativity in stitch gives us to express is so important. I don't know what I'll do with these, but one day I'll find something that I can do with them. I believe it's very appropriate that we begin to consider how we as textile artists begin to work with the materials we have around us. And it seemed very poignant that through looking at the memories and the associations each and every one of us have in this group to our connection with cloth, that we'll be able to make a statement not just of the last year, but also about our lifetime of work using the associated materials with our practice. I believe that's the strength of Art Textiles Made in Britain. We are really relating and connecting our thoughts and processes to the materials that we have under our hands and we stitch with a needle and thread. Thank you very much for joining Found with Art Textiles Made in Britain at the Festival of Quilts. If you would like to find out more about our work and also in the future about the projects we will be doing and where this will tour to, please visit our website, which is found at arttextilesmadeinbritain.com.